thank you for coming along and supporting this live stream event. And so what I'd like to do is introduce you to Adrian Reed, who will be discussing the tricky topic today of problem analysis and its importance in successful projects. Adrian is a true advocate of the analysis profession. In his day job, he acts as principal consultant and director at Blackmetric Business Solutions, where he provides business analysis, consultancy, and training solutions to a range of clients in varying industries. He is also past president of the UK chapter of the IIBA, which is the International Business Analysis Institute, and he speaks internationally on topics relating to business analysis and business change. Adrian also wrote the 2016 book, Be a Great Problem Solver Now, and the 2018 Business Analyst book, I should say, sorry. He is also a prolific blogger of all things BA related, so do go and look on his blog. There are some really interesting articles. So with the presentation entitled Pre-Project Problem Analysis, a crucial enabler for project success, please welcome Adrian Reed.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. So, so I think one thing that we probably all got in common is that we work in businesses. We probably work on elements of business change. The nature of what we do might vary, whether you're a project manager, a business owner, a business analyst, doesn't really matter. But what we've probably all found from time to time is that some projects get initiated with a very, very firm view of what the solution should be. And sometimes that view on the solution is formulated very, very early, long before any analysis of the problem or opportunity has taken place. And there's this kind of trap that I suspect many of us in the room or in the virtual room have seen, where projects get initiated and they spend money and resources get expended, and they sort of get pushed over the line and they deliver everything that was asked for, but then there's this sudden realization that that wasn't what we needed. And it's quite an expensive and unsatisfactory experience when that happens. So the topic I want to talk about today, actually, it's the type of analysis that we'd expect to do, as change professionals before a project gets launched, to really understand the nature of what that project might be, to understand the potential scope, but most importantly, to understand the problem scope before we start talking about solution. Now, I am a business analyst, so I will be sort of wearing a BA hat on, but I'm pretty sure that whatever your role is, this is the sort of thing that can be used, throughout organisations. So I'm going to share some tools, some techniques, some ideas. It'll be a relatively quick fire presentation, but if you want to know any more about any of this stuff, please do drop me a line or connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, because there's much more about this. I'm very happy to share. But what I wanted to do was start with a bit of a case study, a bit of a story. And I need you to suspend disbelief for just a second. And I want you to imagine that, that we're not in Guernsey. I'd say you're not in Guernsey, I'm in Portsmouth. Imagine I'm not in Portsmouth. And we're all collectively in Queensland, Australia. And I've never been to Queensland, but if it looks like that, I'm certainly up for any projects that are out there if anyone knows of any. And it turns out that around about 2007, the Queensland Health Authority was launching a fairly major, fairly impactful project. It might not have sounded like the most interesting, but they were launching a program of work to replace their payroll system. And payroll, sounds relatively self-contained. There's undoubtedly some complexity there, but it's the sort of thing that if you get wrong, like you've only got to get payroll wrong a couple of times, and you've not got much of an organisation to work with. So the first question, and if we were all in the same room, I would ask you to shout out an answer to this question, but it's more difficult because we're in different rooms. So I'm going to throw a question, on the screen, and I just want you to have a number in your mind. And it's not like a test or a trick question, but just imagine if you were implementing a payroll system in an organization, what kind of cost would you think that would involve? And just have a figure in your head. So I'm sure you've all got a figure in your head now. And if we're in the room, you'd probably shout out a number. Some would shout out numbers in tens of thousands, others would say hundreds of thousands, and we probably have a few people that were in the millions. Now, the original budget for this project was 6.1 million Australian dollars, which translates to around about 3.4 million pounds. And you and I, as you know, business organization change professionals, we could have a good debate. We could have a good debate around whether 3.4 million is good value for money on a payroll system. But the perspective that those of us who have the specific attention to detail, the analysts amongst us, will have noticed the wording on that slide where it says original projection. And you'll probably be wondering what it actually ended up costing. The actual cost, and this isn't quite like for like because it includes additional operational overheads, is estimated at closer to 1.5 billion Australian dollars, which is just under 1 billion pounds. So I'll kind of let you drink those figures in for a moment, because you've got a project here that had a budget of 3.4, an original budget of 3.4 million, ends up spending nearly £1 billion. I would not like to be the project manager that has to explain away, or the project sponsor that has to explain away that variance on a highlight report. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that if you spend nearly £1 billion on a payroll system, that it would work. But the punchline, if we can call it that, of this case study is that it didn't, or rather it didn't work well. So having spent £1 billion, more or less, they were left with 190 manual workarounds. There were 92,000 paper forms still being processed every fortnight. The number of payroll staff increased. They actually needed more people. You know, there were no savings. The cost base increased. And my favourite bit is that there were around 3,400 staff receiving overpayments. And because the way the system was configured, there was no way of clawing that money back. So there was about 1.7 million Australian dollars every fortnight sort of going down a black hole. And although it was sold as a like-for-like migration, a lift and shift, a copy and paste, there were 2,500 customizations made to this off-the-shelf package that they implemented. And if any of you, as I'm sure many of you have been involved in those kind of implementations, the more you customize, the harder it becomes to maintain. The more you bolt on, the more you end up creating tomorrow's legacy today. Now, a question I always think that's worth asking in these case studies where projects have gone off the rails is, why did it happen? Because these were intelligent people, right? These were good, qualified project professionals, but yet still their dollars ended up going directly down the drain. One unusual thing that the Australian government did, naturally there was an inquiry about this project, as you'd expect. But one unusual thing the Australian government did is they didn't just put the summary report online. They actually put all of the primary evidence, or most of the primary evidence, online. So if you're a project geek like me, you could actually go on and see boxes and boxes of information about this project, emails from suppliers, you could see project documentation and so on. And I spent some time figuring out, in my view, my take on what some of the causes were. And some of these might resonate with you. You might have seen these in your organizations and projects too. So firstly, there was no clear statement of problem. So it turns out, or it looks likely, that different stakeholders thought this project was happening for slightly different reasons. On the one hand, there was a group of stakeholders who saw this very much as an IT problem. It was very much an IT, in inverted commas, project. It was about getting off of a set of technologies that were out of support onto a set of technologies that were in support with no changes. It was just like lift and shift. But there appears to have been at least one other group who were thinking that it was about taking best in class processes and re-engineering processes that come out of the box on this new software package. There were probably others, there may well have been others that were thinking it's about business architecture and centers of excellence and so on. And any one of those objectives is probably achievable. All of them are probably achievable if they're agreed up front. But if you've got different perspectives, the project's going to tear itself apart. Your scope is going to creep. Not only that, there was a massive inadequacy in the assessment of the complexity. So it turns out there were tens of thousands, I think it was something like 24,000 combinations of pay and benefit, like 24,000 contract structures, if you like. And that's a huge amount of complexity for an off-the-shelf system to deal with. And you think, I look at this as an analyst and say, well, rationalize that first. Simplify the contract structures, the remuneration structures, before you look at hard coding them onto a new IT system and creating maintenance problems in future. There was also this illusion of a burning platform. And management writers love that term, don't they? Creating a burning platform to create action. The thing about a burning platform is, if any human, if we've got a fire behind us, then it creates the illusion there's only one way to go. You've got to jump. And there was this urgency created that, well, we have to get off of this, or the project team was saying they have to get off of this unsupported tech. If you trawl through some of the emails, there's a suggestion that the vendors actually would have continued on extended support, which would have bought them some time. Now, why that wasn't investigated, we'll never know. Maybe it was some sort of political reason, but they actually potentially had more options than were presented to the decision makers. And last but by no means least, and I'm sure you will have come across this, but the solution just sounded so simple. Like it rolls off the tongue. You buy a best in breed, a commercial off-the-shelf package. It's lift and shift. It's drag and drop. We take what we have today, we migrate. What could be easier than that? Well, actually, that can be a really complicated thing to do. And of course, there were many other reasons beside. I would be being overly simplistic if I said that these were the only reasons. Clearly, there was a governance issue, I would suggest, given that the overspend. And I know what you're thinking, or I suspect many of you are thinking, well, that's really interesting, Adrian. It's a cute story, but you know what? We don't work in Australia, we work in Guernsey, and we probably don't work on payroll systems. And I agree, either do I. But I bet all of us have seen situations, projects, initiatives where there hasn't been a clear statement of problem. And later in the project, different views have emerged, which have created all sorts of problems. I bet we've all seen situations where there's been no time to assess the complexity. There's been like the JDI, the just do it approach. And that doesn't always end well, particularly if there's that illusion that there's only one option. And that simple sounding solution that's driven the business without an understanding of the problem can lead to some really, really unfortunate outcomes. And if it does sound familiar, you might have found that sometimes there's a solution that's presented like almost like a saccharin-coated, sweet, sickly sweet silver bullet that's going to solve the world's ills. And there are different themes. So maybe it's this CRM package will solve all of our problems, or this ERP package will solve all of our problems, or whatever. But without articulating the problems or the opportunities that we're actually trying to address, there's a danger that will end up with change for change's sake. And that may well not end in the positive way that we would hope. Because with that silver bullet, what tends to happen is we get dragged down these like dark, dank project rabbit holes. And I suspect we've all worked in those where the project just gains momentum, it becomes too big to fail, and we get it over the line just, everyone's exhausted, but it doesn't necessarily achieve the benefits. And there's a real danger if we're not careful, that those dollars end up, or pounds end up, directly down the drain. So I'm going to talk about some techniques we can use early in the business change life cycle to avoid those sorts of things happening. But before I do, I want to share a bit of a secret because it probably sounds like I'm sort of blaming stakeholders and blaming our sponsors and blaming because they think in solutions rather than problems. Because it'd be a heck of a lot easier if people came to us and said, here's a neatly articulated description of my problem or opportunity. But as much as I would love that, and I'm, I am a business analyst, I think in problems all of the time, but there's something about human nature, I think, that means we all think in solutions, at least some of the time. And I'll give you an example of that, because in my house, I've got a cupboard, and some of you might have a wry smile along with this one, because you might have this cupboard too. And this cupboard is full of what I like to call techno junk. It's full of gadgets that I've bought because I think they're a good idea, and then they've just ended up collecting dust. Until very recently, I owned 3 juicers, and from what I can make out, that's 3 more juicers than most people need in their lives. And why did I first buy a juicer? Well, I bought it because I was in a shop. It looked good, it was shiny, I like gadgets, and I thought it was going to change the way that I prepared food, and particularly how I sort of had breakfast and this sort of thing. But I didn't actually think about the reality of it, because like I guess most of us, I'm normally rushing around in the morning, and the idea of having lots of fresh fruit and veg around is a great idea, but not really practical for me in the way my lifestyle works. And so, they end up collecting dust in a cupboard, along with lots of other ill-decided gadget purchases. And I guarantee that in your organization, my organization, there are bits of technology, bits of process that are like that juicer. Someone's thought they were a good idea, and they may or may not ever actually be being used, because there isn't that understanding of the need, the problem, or the opportunity. Now, what this comes down to, there are lots of theories, of course, about how we think as human beings, but one that I've found very useful in my practice as a BA is the difference between divergent and convergent thinking. And I show you this picture in passing, really, but the idea is that human beings, we can think divergently, so we can think about the maximizing possibilities. If you've ever done proper brainstorming, that's divergent thinking. You're not trying to come up with one idea, you're trying to come up with 10 or 100 or 1,000 or however many. And then there's convergent thinking, which is where we take all of the ideas and we rank them, scale them, group them, sort them, and come up with your shortlist or your chosen option in this context. And I think as human beings, quite often what we seem to naturally do is we see a problem and we go straight into convergent thinking, which means we'll often take the first viable solution we find. But with a bit more digging, we might find that there's a second, cheaper, better option, or a third. So actually, if we embrace that idea of converging and diverging, that sort of diamond thinking, we might come up with better outcomes for ourselves and our stakeholders. So linking this back to the sort of project domain, well, we can link all of this to 3 of the most important questions that we ask on projects, whatever our role, whether you're a sponsor, business owner, project manager, business architect, analyst. Not the only 3, but 3 of the most important questions we ask are why, what, and how. Why is the project necessary? What's the scope of the change? And how is that change going to happen? And what's the impact? And I think looking back a few years, there have in the past been some approaches to projects which would have us believe these things are very separate. Like we could go out and ask all the why questions, and our stakeholders will answer those. And then we ask all the what questions, and we get the requirements. And then we ask all the how questions, and we do the design and the solutioning. And you and I know it's sadly not quite that simple. Because we might go and ask someone why, and they tell us a bit of the how, a bit of the what, and none of the why. But we have to sort of help each other to climb a logical ladder to understand why these changes are necessary. So what I'm going to talk about for the second half of this presentation is really taking a thin slice through the why, the what, and the how, getting just enough for us to be on the same page with our stakeholders over what problem we're trying to solve. And a template that I use is called a project concept summary. This will be created pre-project. You can use this to prioritize the projects that you may or may not do. Some of them will end up not going ahead, but this is it's designed to be a quick way of ensuring people are on the same page before the project starts. And it doesn't project terribly well, but I'll show you an example. If you want a Word version of this, by the way, let me know. I'll gladly send it to you. This is an example of a one-pager. You can see it's got some configuration information at the top, like the name and ID and so on. But then there's various boxes for different elements. Like we have a problem statement, a concise and precise statement that everyone agrees is the reason we're doing, or that we might do this project. If it was an opportunity, it could be an opportunity statement. I'll show you an example of one of those in a second. We've got critical success factors and KPIs. If we've agreed what problem we're going to solve, the CSFs and KPIs are saying, how will we know when we've solved them? What's our scale of success? What does success look like? In the middle, there's a business use case diagram. That is a little bit of a business analyst-y term. I will talk about it, but that's one that if you want to know more about, I can talk about offline. And then there's recommendations for next steps, possible solutions, and so on. But the possible solutions is plural. So at this point, we're not aiming to come up with one definite option. It's a case of let's come up with 3, 4, which could then feed into a business case or whatever. So what I want to do now is take you through some of these techniques and show how they might be useful in the kind of context that we work as change practitioners. So first of all, the problem statement, which I've always found to be a really, really powerful technique. Now, there's no universally agreed, there's no sort of right or wrong way of writing a problem statement, but a fairly standard way is like this. The problem of some sort of problem is affecting some stakeholders somewhere, the impact of which is some negative impact. A successful solution would deliver some positive outcomes. Now, that might sound simple, but it's by no means simplistic, because if you think about the 4 questions we're answering there, well, by articulating what the problem is, we're answering the hard question, the tricky question: what problem are we actually trying to solve here? Think back to that Australia, the Queensland example. If it became clear that there were multiple views on the problem, maybe, just maybe, someone could have nudged that project back on course. By understanding who it's affecting, we're starting to understand who our stakeholders are, who's impacted, who cares. By asking what the impact is, we're asking the harsh but important question: why should we care? And I know that sounds harsh, but in most organizations, well, certainly every organization I've ever worked, there are more possible opportunities, more possible problems to solve than there is budget and focus. So understanding the impact helps us weed out the ones that, this is the key thing that we need to do. These are the key 5, 6, 7, whatever that we need to focus on right now. And a successful solution that helps us understand the benefits, how we know when it's done. And a really important point, it's a successful solution would, not a successful solution is. So it's about the outcomes that a successful solution would deliver. Now, I know that sounds a bit abstract, and so I've put together a bit of a worked example to illustrate the point. And let's imagine that we all work for a mail order retailer, the kind of place that advertises stuff. You ring up, you place an order, and they send stuff in the post. And one Friday, our marketing colleagues are looking very happy with themselves because they set up a brand new advertising campaign. They've got a great deal on a slot prime time the following Saturday. So we tune in on the Saturday, and customers are really liking the deal. We can see the stats that they're ringing in. It's great. It airs a second time, and customers are really, really taken by this deal. So we can almost see like the pound signs in the marketing director's eyes. But then it airs a third time, and disaster strikes. The phone exchange melts, the phone lines are jammed, no one can get through, the server room melts, disaster. We gingerly come into the office on a Monday morning, and the marketing manager thumps his fist on the desk and says, "We need more phone lines in our call center." And we sort of take a sharp intake of breath internally, and we think, well, you could do that. You could have more phone lines, but you're going to need more people, and you're going to need more desk space. And actually, you've just changed your cost model and potentially your operating model. And it sounds a bit like a silver bullet. And maybe if we did a little bit of upfront problem analysis, we could create some different options. So let's imagine the marketing manager entertains us for just half a day. We speak to some of his team. We start to get a better idea of the problem. Initially, it's stated as we need more phone lines, but we start to decompose that down, drill down to understand the real need. Well, we'd probably find first off, the problem isn't actually with a lack of phone lines. It's about congested and busy phone lines. It's a supply and demand matching problem, a different problem. By finding out who it would affect, we start to find that it affects our customers and our call center staff. Really clear that our customers are in the frame, but would have been easy to forget call center staff. But you know what? When it's busy, they get stressed. When it's not busy, they get bored. The impact of which is we lose potential sales as customers can't get through. There's a real tangible impact. This is one that we probably would want to solve. And a successful solution would enable customers to get information and make a purchase quickly without holding, leading to increased revenues and profits. Now, don't get me wrong, although this is simple to read, it's very, very tricky to create. This would take iteration to agree the wording. But once we get there, we find that we've sort of gone on a bit of a trek, a bit of a journey with our stakeholders away from that initial exclamation of we need more phone lines. We've dodged that silver bullet. Now we've got this problem statement, we can start to think divergently and think, how else could we solve that? Maybe it's a web portal, maybe it's ordering by text, maybe it's sending out paper catalog. It could be anything. But it opens up the universe of possibilities. We can go on and take this even further. If you imagine zooming in on that final sentence, a successful solution would sentence, we can start to say, how would we know when this problem is solved? So imagine taking that problem statement, or if it was an opportunity, equally an opportunity statement, putting that in the middle of a balanced business scorecard. Now, this is an adaptation of the traditional balanced business scorecard. This is the version from IIBA's business analysis body of knowledge, but you can trace this back to Kaplan and Norton's work back in the 90s. And we can ask financially, what qualitative critical success factors would there be financially if we solve this thing? Maybe it's better revenue. Okay, what's the KPI? What's the scale of measurement, the key performance indicator? It might be, increased revenue in this product line over this time frame. But if we over focus on finance, we might do so to the detriment of our customers. So we can ask, what will our customers be saying about us when this problem's solved? Is it about excellent customer service? Great aspiration. How are we going to measure that? Is it about the number of customers that stay with us? Is it about, net promoter score? What internal processes do we have to excel at? If we're a mail order retail company, maybe it's about the number of, best in class logistics. So the number of parcels we get in and out of the warehouse every day, the cost per order or whatever. And finally, at the bottom, on the traditional balanced business scorecard, this was learning and growth or innovation. I've sort of embellished this to be sustain. And what I'm saying here is quite often there are things that we ought to be thinking about and measuring that ensure that problem stays solved or that opportunity stays leveraged. So for example, there will be no point solving that last problem that we were talking about in that mail order retail company that only worked for that one advertising campaign. You'd want to solve it in a way that works for the future as well. And even if we just do those two exercises, you know, imagine if we'd done that in the Queensland example, well, actually we'd have a clear view that there are different perspectives on the problem we're trying to solve and the outcomes we're trying to achieve. If we have consensus on this kind of thing, that really is the thin slice through the why. We've got that thin slice, people are agreeing on why this is a priority. With that thin slice of the why, we can go on and talk about the what. And one way we can explore that, explore the scope of the problem, if you like, is with a technique known as roles and goals. And this is the kind of thing you can do very quickly. If you've got the right stakeholders in the room and a few post-it notes, that's pretty much all you need to start it off. You know, you won't get it perfect first time, or well, certainly I never got it perfect first time, but you get something to work with. And you can start by brainstorming roles. Who has an interest in this problem domain? And you'll tend to find you come up with noun words. So like customer, or call center worker, or call center manager, or management information reporting team. And you'll come up with loads of them, but you can group them into generally different themes and groups. Then for each group, you can say, well, what are they actually trying to achieve in the context of this scope? What is it they're trying to do? And you tend to find you get verb noun phrases here. So a customer might be wanting to place an order. You know, a call center worker might be wanting to sell a product. A courier might be wanting to check the orders that have gone out or whatever. And there's a whole exercise then in theming those together, grouping them, but you can relatively quickly get an idea of the sort of people, the sort of roles, and the sort of activities, goals, that are in the scope of the problem domain. The challenge is then, how do you articulate that scope? And there's a technique known as the business use case diagram. If we do have any business analysts in the audience, you might be familiar with system use case diagrams. Business use case diagrams are just a slightly higher level. If you're familiar with the Unified Modeling Language, or UML, this is not strict formal UML, it's an extension to UML. But I'll briefly explain it. If you want to know more, contact me offline on this one. But these are the core symbols that you need for this sort of early project analysis. You've got a business actor. There's someone outside of your organization. You've got a worker. You can tell they're internal because they're in like a circle. They're in the confines of the organization. You've got a business use case, which is some kind of interaction, some sort of goal, and a communication which joins the things together. Key thing to mention is those actors and workers, they're derived from the roles. The business use case is derived from the goal. Now, although I haven't got time to explain this fully today, I wanted to just show you one quick example. This is a fragment of a business use case diagram. But even if you've never seen this approach before, you can probably get the sense of the broad scope of the problem domain. We've got a customer wanting to order products, and that involves the sales and the dispatch team. They sometimes query an order, which involves the dispatch team. And you've got the dispatch team monitoring the courier efficiency, which involves the courier. And this can create conversations about scope, because someone might say, no, monitoring courier efficiency, we're not interested in that for this project. So it's very, very high level, but you can start to scope out the what. So the problem statement and our balanced business scorecard, we've got a thin slice of the why. A business use case diagram is one way of getting a thin slice of the what, the area that might change. There are many others. If you're familiar with context diagrams, they're another possibility too. With that thin slice of the why and the what, we can then start to say, how could we solve this problem? How could we change that area to alleviate that problem, to achieve those critical success factors and KPIs? And of course, one of the brilliant things about the work that we all do, I think, in the change world, in the business world, is there are so many options. It could be software. If it's software, it could be on-premise, it could be software as a service, it could be cloud. It could be a process change that involves no software. It could be an organization change. It could be a combination of all of those sorts of things. But this is where that divergent thinking comes in. So maximizing the volume of ideas, coming up with, 100 ideas, 90 of which are non-starters, but that enables us to get the 10 which are fantastic and the one that will really save us money and move the needle in terms of efficiency. So we can think divergently before converging. So wrapping those techniques back, and I know I've gone through them relatively quickly, I'm keen to allow time for questions should there be any, but wrapping that back to that concept summary, as I say, this is only one possible template. It's the one I personally like to use, but there are others out there, I'm sure. But we've got our problem statement, our concise and precise view of the problem or opportunity we're looking to solve. Simple to read, tricky to create, requires iteration. We've got our critical success factors and KPIs. I've presented them on this example as a mind map. You could just present them as bullet points. And with those two things, we've got the problem and the measures. That this is the problem. This is how we know when it's solved. These are the outcomes that we're looking for. We've got an early indication of problem scope with our business use case diagram derived from that roles and goals. If other requirements have sort of emerged, we can list them. A list of possible solutions that we think are probably feasible and desirable. But we, remember, this is early day. This is quick analysis. It's just enough analysis. And then recommendations for next steps. Those recommendations could, of course, be, well, you know what, let's go on and do a formal business case. We've got 4 options. Let's do a full feasibility study and figure out the cost benefit of all of them. It might be that one option is so clearly likely to be the best and is low risk, low cost, that the recommendation is, let's have some funding to do it, but let's experiment along the way. Let's implement it. If it works, amplify it. If it doesn't work, attenuate it, slow it down type of thing. So this can fit very, very well into some of the business agility type approaches and even the sort of agile project management approaches as well, because you can lead off from many angles. Linking back to those questions, why, what, and how, these are the techniques which I've sort of very quickly talked about today. With the problem statement and the critical success factor and KPI, we get a thin slice of the why. Roles and goals, business use case diagram, any other conceptual requirements, the what, and solution options, a thin slice of the how. That can all feed into that project concept summary. But it doesn't have to end there. So I must admit, as a BA, I'm always pleased when I've got one of these documents, because imagine being months down the line now and you're prioritizing requirements and everyone's telling you that every requirement is a must, because that's what, in my experience at least, everyone always says. But actually, if we've got a problem statement, even if we've just got a problem statement, we can say, okay, well, can you help me understand how that requirement relates to that problem? Because if it does, then it's probably an absolute must-have. If it doesn't, then maybe it's not for this project, or maybe it's a nice to have, or even the very most a could have. And it links to other requirements artifacts, other project artifacts. It can be one of the documents that's at the top of the traceability tree. If you've got one of these, creating a project charter or initiation document is much, much easier. You've got the beginnings of the scope. It can drive a feasibility study. From a business analysis perspective, it feeds really nicely into system use cases, user stories, process modeling, whatever you like. So it's not a standalone document. It can feed into, it can be like the funnel of a project appraisal process before the organization's decided which project to take. Now, a question I get asked a lot when I talk about this approach is, what if they just won't listen? Like, what if, because there never seems to be enough time. I don't know if you find the same, but there's never enough time, particularly up front. And my answer to that as a BA is always the same, which is sometimes we've just got to do this stuff by stealth. And I don't mean in any kind of nefarious way, but if there is the edict or the diktat to just get going and just do it, then of course we probably have to do that. But alongside that, if we just put some problem statements together to aid our own understandings, and if we find that there are various problems, various views on the problem, then we can escalate that and say, you know what, look, this person thinks that this is the problem, this person thinks this is the problem. We're probably going to have scope creep if we don't solve this. Can we just have a quick workshop and get people together? Can we just hit the pause button for 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, half an hour to get people back on track? And it's amazing, in my view, amazing the power a short intervention like that can have. And it's something I think as a community we shouldn't underestimate. Just a short hit of the pause button can get something back on track and pelting, slow down so that we can speed up. My final ponder point before I open for questions. I opened up with this crazy story about Queensland and Australia and dollars going directly down the drain. My ponder point for all of us is, how often has that happened in your, mine, all of our organizations? But more importantly, what can we do as a community of business professionals to help avoid that? Perhaps using some of the techniques I've talked about today, but there are many, many others. I've only scratched the surface. I'm sure you'll be familiar with other techniques. There are loads out there. What can we do to help avoid that? And what can we do to ensure that our stakeholders, our organizations, get the best possible outcomes, and we create the best outcomes for the communities in which we serve? And with that, I will say thank you very much and hand back to Sean.
Okay, thank you, Adrian, and I'm sure we would like to give a round of applause. And with that, shall we go straight into the questions? Adrian, are you happy to answer a few questions? I think we've got 5 minutes just to cover off.
Absolutely.
The floor. Well, maybe, actually, Adrian, maybe I could start if that's okay.
Yeah.
And maybe, just to so that we're all on the same page, really. You mentioned your title, which is business analyst, and I think many of us have, we do hear the term. But what is a professional business analyst?
Wow, that's the kind of question that should be easy to answer, but it's actually really, really hard. And in traditional business analyst style, probably the only answer, if there is one, is it depends. But I'll give you a sort of broad answer. So that's the first thing, is there are at least 2 distinct meanings of that term. There are business analysts who work in finance and do quantitative, mind-bendingly complex quantitative stuff, and I'm not one of those types of BAs. That's a different discipline with the same title. But the business analyst in the change world, without sounding flippant, it really is about the analysis of the business or organization. And so a BA will typically help understand the problem before a project is initiated. So, speaking to stakeholders, going to the operational area, understanding the processes, understanding the IT systems, warts and all, and understanding the mess, as we often call it in the trade. You're parachuted into a messy situation. It's chaotic, often chaotic. And creating some kind of order out of that chaos, creating perhaps process models or whatever, and then understanding what the desired outcome is. Because if you understand, well, there's a problem there. What is it that this organisation is trying to get to, and how might it get there? And then if that's like at the beginning, then in the middle of projects, there's often requirements analysis. And particularly if you've got any kind of IT system, there will often need to be requirements written. Now, that might be traditional requirements, it might be agile user stories, it might be use cases, it doesn't really matter. But if someone's going to either design a system or even implement and configure a system, even if we're buying off the shelf and it needs to integrate with our existing systems, someone needs to figure out how the requirements, what that's going to look like. So there's sort of requirements analysis, elicitation, validation, all that kind of good stuff, and then even after a project, like benefits realization. As if a BA has been involved since the very beginning, and it's not, you know, we wouldn't be involved. There's different levels of engagement, but after a project, often we can help people measure whether the benefits have actually been achieved. So if you think about a business change lifecycle, it's a really broad role, and it can literally involve anything from that upfront strategic, often called strategic business analysis, or the understanding of the problem, through to the more traditional requirements analysis, through to the benefits. So a broad role, if that makes sense, Sean.
Yes, no, thank you very much. No, that's really useful, and definitely sets the scene. Any other questions for Adrian? No? Okay. Well, Adrian, I think I took a great deal for outcome. So I'm in the screen, so excuse me. I think, you know, I personally took a great deal from that, and you took us through some really powerful concepts by just showing that one page. And I think behind that one page, my taking from that, there's an awful lot of structured thinking going on, just presented on that one page. And as from my perspective of project manager, if I saw that sort of analysis coming in, like you say, even if it's just a light touch, I think that would be, it would set us off a lot better along the lines of when we're starting to run the project, and give us a great more level of confidence going forward. But very, very useful tools, and thank you for your time. It's very interesting.
No, you're most welcome. I'll just before I go, if I just pop this slide back up, just very, very briefly. Because if anyone, so first of all, if anyone, I mean, I'll make the slides available, but if anyone wants the Word version of the template, just drop me a line. I'm very, very happy to send that on. You can just use it, and like I love it when people adapt it. If you do adapt it, just let me know, because it probably means you've created a better version, and I'll start using the adapt. It's great to know how people adapt it. And if you have enjoyed what I've had to say here, I do have a blog. At adrianreed.co.uk, so I'd love it if you took a look at that one as well. So yeah, but thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Adrian. Thank you.
Thanks.